What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Crew 2. And well, as y'all know, most of the touring vehicles have been updated with that nice handling update now, which honestly was probably needed. I feel like a lot of people were probably waiting for this to hit the touring car category. Honestly, I cannot wait to see something like this in like the street class and or the hypercar category as well. But in this video, I'm going to take a look at a specific car that I have been seeing everywhere. I also do want to mention to stay tuned for the other touring cars in the future as well, because I'm planning to do videos on basically all of these cars to see how they are now, and I'm also planning on doing my top 10 vehicles in this class as well. So it's also going to make things a bit different now as well, because there's going to be so many different cars being used. But in this video, guys, I do want to focus on the Ferrari FXX K. I have been noticing a lot of players were excited to see this car actually get changed, because for one, it's going to be one of the most beautiful race cars I have ever seen. Like, this thing is so nice. Funnily enough, in Drive Club, this was actually one of my favorite cars to use. I really love the way that it looked, plus that sound was absolutely insane at high RPMs. But the Ferrari FXX K is probably going to be one of those new touring cars that you're probably going to see everywhere. One thing I did notice about this car though, guys, I would say the only flaw with it is probably going to be that lower top speed being around 240 miles per hour. It's going to actually be around 20 miles per hour slower than many of the other touring cars, but one thing I did notice though is I do not think it's going to hurt it in any way, because my goodness, this car is so dang stable around corners and or just racing in general. I would say on most of the tracks I really don't think it's going to hurt this vehicle in any way. Now, if you guys were to do some of the like longer US Speed Tour events, then sure, that lower top speed might hurt in some areas, but to be honest, I feel like this thing's going to be like a track monster. I do think some players might view the lower top speed on the FXXK to be a bit of a problem, but to be honest, on many of these events I was testing this car out on, I was honestly having a great time, and it really wasn't struggling all that much either, which is kind of crazy, guys. Now, one thing about this car though, my goodness, that acceleration's going to be insane with a Nitrochemist set. You can actually get this thing up to its 240 mile per hour top speed insanely easily. Even on many of the tracks, you can basically fly around many of the corners at a higher speed. Even compared to some of the other touring cars, I was noticing how planted this thing actually felt, which honestly I would also say is going to be needed, considering this is actually a race car. And I feel like a lot of players were waiting for something like this Ferrari to actually be changed and be usable. It's kind of insane, guys, before this handling update, how many cars were actually being used. I would say it's probably 3 or 4 out of like 70 plus touring vehicles in the game that were actually being used. So I really do like that Ubisoft actually did this for the touring car category, making many of these cars actually usable and or can compete in like summits and or PvP. One thing I was also noticing about this Ferrari when I was racing it was the fact that when you guys actually fly around corners with this thing, it gives you so much confidence because the car is basically sticking to the ground. I know before this update, a lot of the cars honestly did not feel that good. Many of them felt very unplanted and or just not that great overall in corners, and you most likely were hitting the nitrous and or sliding, or you would go around the turns and you probably could go a lot faster, but the car was like fighting you on it, and then you would proceed to jump into like your pro settings and try to mess around with that, which, being real, depending on the car, also didn't really seem to help the vehicle all that much. And even with really good settings on the car, it also still seemed to fight you in some areas around corners and stuff. So this handling update, guys, is by far going to be one of the best things to happen to the touring car class. I feel like a lot of this was honestly overdue in many ways, because I was waiting for cars like the FXXK to actually be usable and once again actually be used in summits and or actually be a good car. I started to notice many people actually getting kind of annoyed that they had to use certain cars in like the touring car class to actually do good in a summit. I was noticing many players probably getting tired of only picking like the same 2 or 3 cars in the touring car class to actually compete in a summit. Luckily, this is not going to be the case anymore, guys, because you can easily run something like the Ferrari and still get a really good score in a summit and or score enough to actually get into platinum. I really do think this is a much needed change in the game, because now we can actually run different cars instead of always picking those few cars that are actually going to be like the quote unquote meta and or best vehicles you can choose. And what's also going to be great is the fact that now if you guys actually like something like the FXXK or Maybe you're a fan of one of the other Ferraris that wasn't that great before, but now the car's actually going to be pretty dang good. Maybe you might have been a fan of one of the other Ferraris that might have not been that good before. At least now you actually have the option to pick some of these other cars and still compete in summits. I really do think this is going to help the gameplay so much on this, guys, because it's going to mix it up in so many ways. That way a lot of players are actually going to be able to pick different cars, and I really do feel like this FXXK is going to be worth a look. I know a lot of players might get stumped by that lower top speed, guys, but I would recommend trying out this car anyway. I still feel like it's going to be one of the best touring cars in the entire game.